G'day everybody. So you want to build a cafe racer? Why? Welcome to Basket Case. Are you one of these blokes and you're looking for a fashion accessory, or are you a motorcyclist? Well, I know which category I fit into, and it's not the first one. If you're after a fashion accessory, go and buy something that's already done, or go and get yourself an SR400 and bolt on some cool bits and pieces, and you can cruise around to your heart's content. So I thought I'd take the time just to run through some of the pitfalls along the way of building a bike similar to Basket Case or your dream bike, and help try and smooth the way also to registration. I know it sounds funny, but you need to know what you want to end up with. So where do you start? You start with a vision, and you'll draw inspiration from searching the internet and drilling over your mates' bikes, or something you might have seen riding up the road, and or walking around car and bike shows. And you'll have in your own mind what you want to build. First thing is to not get caught up in the whole bloody trap of, this is a cafe racer, this is a bobber, this is a tracker, this is a scrambler, this is a whatever. That's all just. This isn't a cafe racer. The cafe racers were the bikes that were available to the kids in the 50s and 60s, and they would try and replicate the GP bikes of that era, and they put clip-on bars and try and get the engines running as strong as they could, and that cut down seat that we all associate with cafe races. This is a 1981 Yamaha muscle bike that's been customised to look like a cafe racer. It's not a cafe racer, so don't get caught up in all the know-it-all nonsense. We've all seen the pictures, the obligatory power stance, and they're always looking at the ground, I don't know, or off into the distance mysteriously. That made me laugh. But whatever blows your hair back. But yeah, you've got to know what you want to end up with, and you've got to also manage your expectations, because you're going to face challenges along the way. You got to be prepared to fail, and you got to be prepared to learn from those opportunities, because they're going to come. In addition to knowing what sort of bike you want to end up, it's also quite useful to understand what your plans are for that bike. Is this going to be a daily rider, something that needs to be ultra rideable and ultra reliable and behave itself in traffic? Is this going to be something that you're going to kick in the guts once a week and go for a squirt up the road with your mates, and you're happy to live with some compromises like form over function for things like pod filters and carburetors that may not be working properly through the whole range, or bars and seat setups that are going to kill your back and shoulders? Or are you going to be a trailer queen and have something that you just want to take to the shows? Because that's going to influence the type of bike that you build. So when you do finally go to choose that bike, you want to avoid, try and get something that is actually running and riding and registered. It's usually the best bet. If it isn't and it's been parked for a number of years, you're going to have issues. So things that should be raising red flags are: did run when parked, not been started for 15 years, just needs tune up, not run for decades, been in a barn for 40 years. All of those things should be raising red flags, because you're going to end up with a resto mod. The brakes will all be seized up and corroded, the carburetors will be dust inside, you'll have corrosion on most of your major components, your engine will be all cactus, and you're going to have to go through it as well. The only thing you're likely to get away with is probably the frame and the electrical wiring loom, if you're lucky. You need to be committed to the project. The last thing I ever wanted was for this bike to end up on Gumtree, or I guess Craigslist, or whatever your local classifieds are, as an unfinished project. And there are hundreds of them out there. Do you want to be one of them guys? Or do you want something that you can be proud of and ride into the future? These things are really cheap to build. Pick a figure you're comfortable with and then double it and start from there. Oh God, obsess over the seat. You'll obsess over the seat for months. I did. I mean, I started looking online for something that I could bolt on or adapt, or you know, I even toyed with the idea of fashioning one out of sheet metal or aluminium. But in the end, I decided to try something that I'd never really done before, and that was to make it out of fiberglass. And the reason that I think I ended up with that decision was I felt it was going to give me a better result, and I knew the bloody thing had fit. So, you know, it wasn't ever going to be a compromise. And I could build it. It was difficult to try and get the proportions right with this humongous tank, but you know, I think I sort of arrived somewhere where I'm comfortable with it anyway. But yeah, you'll make your decision on what you want to do for your seat, but you'll obsess over it. Oh, you want to run pod filters? I know they give you that. They certainly give you that race look, that cafe racer look. And if you don't have constant velocity carburetors, go and knock yourself out. Which is why ultimately I ended up with the McKerney flat slides. Now the CV carburetors, you can get them to run on pods, but it's not easy. You got to be prepared for the fact that, well, the reality is that, you know, while pods draw lots of air, and that's really good if you want to try and improve your engine's efficiency, you can get more air and fuel mixed into the cylinder, and you're going to, you know, create more power. But yeah, they've done studies that show that most engine wear happens around the 20 micron level, so you need to be sure that, you know, your filter can cope with anything bigger than about 20 microns. And the other issue that you'll have with pods is, well, there's a couple of issues with CV carbs. One is that the carburetors like to have the air delivered in a smooth manner. They're fitted from factory with velocity stacks, and they actually run better on velocity stacks than they do on pods, because it delivers the air in a way that the carburetor likes it, whereas the pods tend to be a lot more turbulent, and the carburetor's got to deal with all this pulsing. So the best recipe for success, if you want to run, is to run a factory airbox. But if you don't want to run a factory airbox, try fitting the pods to the end of your factory velocity stacks. Or another thing that I believe works really well, and something that I was going to try, is to cut a beer can, Coke can, something like that, and fashion a sleeve to fit inside the pod filter, and cover up, you know, start at about 3/4 of the pod filter to 2/3 to 3/4 of the pod filter, and that has two effects. One, it reduces the amount of airflow coming into the carburetor, and you may not need to go as radical on your jets. You may even get away with factory jets. And the other thing is it creates like a velocity stack, I guess, and helps to smooth that airflow out. So give that a go. There's also companies out there that are manufacturing custom shared airboxes, which are really cool, like really low profile, cool shared airboxes. So just have a dig on the internet and see what's available. You're going to need basic mechanical knowledge and basic electrical knowledge. If you can't wire a switch, put it away, because it's going to you're going to end up frying something. You're going to end up doing damage, and the last thing you want to do on any of the components, TCI, any motors or relays, is let out the white smoke, because I can tell you that shit's expensive. But no, in all seriousness, a lot of guys are obsessed with building their own wiring looms. I don't understand the rationale behind that. The factory provides you with an engineered loom, and I mean that. The manufacturer, the engineers at the manufacturers went to a lot of time and trouble to apply Ohm's law to all of the components on the bike, and they understand how much current draw is going to happen across that length of wire for that particular application. So they provide you with a perfectly good loom. You're going to need a charging system, an ignition system, lights, and that's pretty well what a motorcycle harness provides. You can reroute them, as I did with basket case, just unharness it and reroute the wires and reharness it. You can run your LED lights and flasher relays, etc. off it, so I don't understand why you'd want to change. It's good quality wire, lasts for decades, as opposed to the unknown quality that you're going to purchase at your local auto parts store. The other thing you need to remember about factory wiring looms is that there's certain components on the loom that are going to be exposed to higher movement, higher vibration and higher temperatures, and the factory actually fit extremely high quality wires that are designed to cope with that. So if you go and fit a standard automotive wire in some of those applications, they'll fail, and they'll fail a lot earlier than what you're going to get on your factory loom. You're going to need, you know, a good range of tools, spanners, sockets, pliers, soldering irons, those kind of hand tools. If you're going to do any fabrication, you're going to need welders, you're going to need saws, grinders. You need to have that at your disposal. Either have it yourself or know somebody who's got it and have access to it. Having access to a lathe and a milling machine is also fairly useful. And you're going to need the facilities. You're going to need to, you know, it's fine working on the garage floor, but I'm too bloody old for that nonsense, which is why I've got that lift that I made out of an old hospital bed. It was proved to be very, very useful. You can get the bike up to a good level where you can work on it, and you know, you can jack the back wheel up, you can turn it around, do whatever you need to do. So you're going to need that. My skill set, I was fortunate enough to complete an apprenticeship as a fitter and turner, which I think in America you call a industrial mechanic, and in Canada it's a millwright. So yeah, and I've also got a range of engineering modules under my belt as well, post-trade engineering modules. So I'm competent with things like turning and milling and welding, arc, oxy, TIG, MIG. I've had exposure to it all through my experience in industry. And I also worked as an engine builder for a number of years, so I've had quite a bit of experience with overhauling engine components, cylinder heads, rebuilds, bottom ends, etc. So yeah, I've had a good range of exposure. Plus, my dad is actually a panel beater by trade, but has a wealth of engineering knowledge. And as kids, we always had a well-equipped workshop with a lathe and a pedestal drill and welders and grinders and all the rest of it. So right from when I was a little tacker, you know, I had exposure to that, and Dad always tried to pass on his knowledge and his skills to us. His skills surpass pretty well anyone I've ever worked with, so it's always a hard act to follow. Dad brought our first motorcycle home. It was a 1974 DT100A, and I'll never forget that bike. It brings back a lot of really good memories. But Dad brought it home in typical Dad fashion, in a box trailer on a bucket in 1,000 pieces, and he tipped it all over the garage floor, and he said, "There you go, boys, there's your bike, better put it together." So that's all sort of where it started too. Plus, my brother and I have always been into cars and bikes, so we've worked on them all our lives. Dad's a motorcyclist, still rides motorbikes today in his 70s, and he's always had an interest in automotive and transportation as well. So you know, that, I guess we were lucky. Getting it registered is the easiest way is just to start with a running and registered bike, and then you can carry out whatever customisation you want and ride to your heart's content, provided your insurance company's happy to cover you, and you don't go and have an accident or something, I suppose. But if you want to legitimately register it, you need to stick with the rules and regulations for your local, the legislation for your local area. There's within Australia, all the registration schemes are siloed. Each state and territory has their own. Most of them have a club type registration, where you can pay a reduced amount of registration, but you need to be affiliated with a special interest club, and usually the guidelines for that are around rides on sanctioned events, etc. In Tasmania, we're quite fortunate. We've got a special interest registration scheme that has no restrictions on the amount of kilometres you could do, or whether you have to be affiliated with any sporting club or motorcycle historic clubs or anything like that. You can just get on your bike and ride it. The only restrictions are that it fits one of the categories for SI, and they cover lots of things, from motorsport to rallying events and charity type vehicles. It covers a wide gamut, and there's different restrictions for the different classifications. For the basket case, the classification it fitted into was a motorcycle or motor car that is older than 30 years. And that's pretty well it. I also have to have another vehicle that has full registration. And for that privilege, for the SI privilege, I can ride it 52 times per year, which is like once a week. And I pay about a third of the registration costs. It's important to adhere to good engineering principles. People, I think, are misled into believing that motorcycles are a simple machine. And I mean, on the surface, I guess they are. You've got basic body, front guard, tank, rear guard or seat or side covers, not much plastic or steel there. You've got what appears to be fairly primitive suspension setups, particularly on older bikes, and an engine and a simple wiring loom. What could go wrong? But the reality is that they are quite complex, so you need to maintain good engineering principles. In Australia, it is very much frowned upon to apply heat to a frame, whether that be grinding or welding. So that's pretty well a no-no if you can avoid it. Now for me, I did do a bit of welding on the frame. I fitted a tail loop, and the method in which I fitted that was I sleeved it internally. The sleeves slid inside the frame and inside the tail hoop. Both the frame and the tail hoop were cross drilled, and it was plug welded, and then I ran around the frame with a welder as well, but using a low application of heat. And any of that welding was done rear of the shock absorber mounts, so it's not on any structural part of the frame. You want to avoid making any changes to structural parts of the frame if you can avoid it. The reason for that is that you can change the molecular structure of the steel, and it can become brittle with the wrong application of heat. Or, if you're not a very competent welder, you could end up with a weld that'll fracture as well. And the last thing you want is to be riding down the road, and certainly the last thing that any transport department wants is for you to be riding down the road and have your bike break in half underneath you the first time you hit a pothole or a speed. In terms of lighting, under Australian design rules, you are allowed to change your lighting provided it complies with the Australian design rules, and that is basically around the location and things like distance between indicators and lumens and headlight positions, etc. The other thing, the best recipe for success is to make sure that the actual light itself is ADR compliant. And the way that you can be confident that it is if it is what they term as E-stamped or E-marked. And all the lights on basket case, including the LED indicators, are E-marked. So they actually physically have an E within a circle. You'll pay triple what you can buy them for elsewhere, but at least you know they're compliant and they're not going to fade and they're not going to cause you any grief if you have trouble with the traffic inspectors. Exhaust systems are another one that come under ADR, and there are grandfather clauses within the ADR system in terms of exhausts and the decibels that you're allowed to produce. Current bikes, I think they're down to around 60 decibels, or not much more than that, and they have to be stamped to say that they comply with emissions and noise standards, and you can't alter that. So, you know, if you've got a new bike, you're not meant to change out your exhaust. Older bikes, they changed at different periods in time, so a bike that was manufactured up to a certain date can comply, whereas one after that date won't. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but I know that 1981, when Basket Case was built, I'm allowed to go to 100 decibels, so that's pretty loud. There's no reason why you shouldn't be putting upgrades on, particularly, you know, lighting and brakes and things like that, safety. There are upgrades available for the XS1100, for example. A lot of guys out there fitting the blue spot calipers off the R1 Yamahas, and they rave about the performance of the braking that delivers. I'm pretty happy with the brakes on this bike. I wanted to run the factory ones mainly because I had them and I didn't have to go and source other components. You know, people will argue that it's hard to buy parts now for some of the genuine components, and they're right, but things like brake pads are readily available, so there's no reason why I shouldn't run them. I could have probably got rid of that 3 kilogram lump that's stopping the back wheel and replace it with a nice little underslung unit similar to what my Ducati has. I could have upgraded to the R1 front brakes. There's a couple of things, like I said, I wanted to work with what I had. The other thing that's always been in the back of my mind about that particular modification, this is not a modern sports bike. It doesn't handle like a modern sports bike, it doesn't go like a modern sports bike, and it doesn't stop like a modern sports bike. The R1 Yamaha has thumping great 40-something millimetre upside down forks, and you know, it's designed to be flogged around a track at 300 kilometres an hour and stop just as efficiently. This big old thing here, you know, weighs a bit more than an R1 and has 37 millimetre diameter front forks, and I've often wondered about, you know, the lateral load that you put through those forks under heavy braking with high performance brakes, what impact that might have in terms of you know, bending your fork tubes, etc. So for me, I'm happy to stick, thank you very much, with the factory brakes. But I did upgrade to stainless steel hoses, and that gives you a really nice positive brake, because they don't absorb energy like rubber hoses do. All the energy goes into your caliper. But just a quick tip about stainless steel brakes, brake hoses: buy them locally. In Australia, if they aren't ADR compliant and stamped, won't get it across the line. You need to, no matter how well they're made, it has to be ADR stamped. And it's also worth, you know, keep an inspector in the loop. I chose mine early, and I just touch base with him. I'm thinking of doing this, and he'd say, yeah, that's cool, you can go ahead with that, or well, you can, but you're going to have to do this to comply, or no, sorry. So that's worth doing. Another no-no is never, ever, ever remove your VIN tag, at least in Australia, your compliance plate. That is to do with legislation around rebirthing of stolen vehicles. So the second that drill hits that rivet, it's an instant fail. Even for paint, you need to mask it up. When you lob up at the inspector, you want to try and come along with a bike that is presentable, something that he's probably likely to maybe exercise the option, or to ignore certain components or certain modifications if you present the bike in a manner that he believes that you've completed. You've done a good job. You presented a safe bike, and you're not going to kill anyone. That he's going to put his name on to say that it's safe for you to ride on the road. He's only doing his job, and he's got to protect himself. So if you lob up for something that looks like this, yeah, or this, right, yep, you're probably not going to get that across the line. So just be respectful and present the best looking bike that you can. Righto, well I reckon that's about enough waffle from me. Thanks for tuning in. I wish you all the luck in the world with your build. But we're not finished yet with Basket Case. Got the National Rally coming up in about a week and a bit. So stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll be back with more from Basket Case.